Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So today we will talk about a new chapter. It will be about the servlets. So to remind you about the main components of web development, if you remember, we discussed the 4-tier architecture. So in this architecture, we have 4 tiers. So quickly speaking, we have the client tier. Then we have the middle tier, which is split into the web tier and the business logic tier, and then the data tier. So today we will focus on the web tier or the web server, in which servlets are programmed by programmers, and the need of having servlets is to prepare the answer for the client requests from an HTML file. So in general, how the workflow will be done, a client using an HTML file will send a request, an HTTP request, to the web tier, and then thanks to the servlets that are programmed within this web tier or this web server, the web server will prepare the response, and the response will be sent back to the client. So how the servlets are programmed, this is what we are going to talk about in this chapter. Okay, to remind you also about the main components we have discussed so far from the beginning of this course. So in general, the web tier or the client is the browser in which clients are browsing using HTML files. Then we have the data tier, in which we have either relational databases, or it could be NoSQL databases, so on and so forth, different kinds of databases. But then within or inside the middle tier, we said that these middle tiers could be programmed using different kinds of languages, such as Java, PHP, and also, for example, Python. In the context of this course, we focus on the Java language. When you use Java, of course, as we have previously said, it's not possible to use Java Standard Edition, but we use rather Java Enterprise Edition. When you use Java Enterprise Edition, at the very first time, developers of Java Enterprise Edition started providing programmers with main components of programming web applications. And they have started using servlets to be installed within the web server. Today, servlets are in general no more used, but they are replaced with other components that you can find within the frameworks that are used in Java or with Java Enterprise Edition, such as Spring, such as GSF or JSF, or for example, Struts. But to help everyone understand the basic or the basic behavior of Java Enterprise Edition, the current chapter aims at understanding how servlets and JSP works as the main workflow within the N-tier architecture. So what is a servlet? A servlet is a thin client that serves to as a mechanism for the request and the response from the client or with the client. Of course, servlets could also be redirected within the same machine. So servlets are basics components of web programming using Java Enterprise Edition. Also, servlet, as I've just explained, is programmed within the server and not on the client side. It is developed on the server side. To be able to execute a servlet, of course, it is necessary. This servlet is triggered from an HTML file that is used by a browser. So from the HTML, we have an URL that is linked to this servlet to allow the execution of this servlet. All right, so to be able to execute such environment, we need different software. On the client side, all what we need is a browser. On the data side, we need a database management system. But within the middle tier, we need both a web server and we need an application server. Application server, let's start with the web server, is split in two parts. The first one is what is called the HTTP server. The objective of such a server is simply to answer the request, HTTP request coming from different clients. And eventually, it could be, this request could be redirected to other components. So you find in the literature two main web server or HTTP servers, Microsoft IIS or Apache. Concerning the servlet container, it is the server or the software that helps executing a servlet. And Tomcat is the software that we have to install in order to allow a web server to execute a servlet within your machine. So if you have a web server, you need to install the combination of Apache and Tomcat. That's why we call it in general the Apache Tomcat. Right. If you have, in addition to the web server, you have an application server, and we will discuss this later on in the context of this course. You have different application servers, each one of them belonging to one of the known companies such as Oracle Glassfish, or for example, IBM WebSphere, so on and so forth. The main remark to point here is all these application servers by default include Tomcat and Apache. So if you install, as it will be the case of our tutorials, we will use Glassfish, and by default, when installing Glassfish on your web server, it will contain by default Apache and Tomcat. So which one to use? Install only Apache and Tomcat or install the whole application server? It depends. If you have an application in which you have only 3 tiers without the need of having a business tier, so then no need to have a application server. And in this case, Apache and Tomcat are enough. In case you have a application server, so installing one of these is then necessary. And in this case, no need to install Apache and Tomcat because, for example, Glassfish already include Apache and Tomcat. So how this works, as you can see in this figure, let's suppose we have a client containing a browser. This browser sends a request to the web server. So the web server listens to different requests coming from clients, and then this request is sent back or redirected to the container of the servlet. And then the servlet is executed, and at the same time, the servlet prepares the response to be sent back to the client. In some other cases, once the servlet receives the request, it is sent back or redirected to another servlet. And then the servlet can send back the answer to the client. In some other cases, of course, this or that servlet could need to access your database using different interfaces such as JDBC or Enterprise Java Beans, as will be discussed later in the context of this course. So you see, from the client to the web server, here we don't discuss the application server, but within between the client or different clients and the web server and inside the servlet container, you have different servlets that can answer the needs of these clients, and you have requests and you have responses and you have also redirections. Okay, so why it is important to use servlets, or what this kind of web container helps us to do? As you can see, suppose we have a servlet container and we launch a given servlet. So we instantiate this servlet with the use of the method init. This will be discussed also later on. After the initialization is done, our servlet may receive a first request. So this request is taken into account and the server starts the execution. But before continuing or before finishing the first request, another request is received from another client, and there is no need for our servlet for our server to finish the first one and then start a new one. Thanks to the Java concept threads, these two requests can be executed at the same time within the same machine, right? So if we want to summarize, we have a browser and we have a web server. Inside this web server, we have a servlet container. This servlet container may contain not only one, but different servlets. All right. We also know that the browser sends an HTTP request using either the GET method or the POST method. To each one of these two methods, inside the servlet, we have two different kinds of functions or methods. We have either do GET to answer the GET method, or we have the do POST to answer the POST method. When you execute one of these two methods, the servlet container has the possibility or allows necessary or enough memory to be able to execute such a request. So it deals with three kinds of memory objects. The first one is the HTTP request, in which all what has been received, or what is received from the request, is stored within this object memory. And while preparing the response to be sent back to the browser, the servlet stores the information to be sent back within this object memory. So what is sent back to the browser is, of course, most of the time HTML, eventually some JavaScript to be executed inside, and some CSS files to allow the HTML to be viewed according to the need of the client. What you can see as disabled components are the cookies on one side and the HTTP sessions. These two concepts will be discussed later. These two concepts allow the application to maintain the session opened between the browser and the server. So if we want to summarize, what are the offered functionalities that are executed within or thanks to the servlet. So a servlet generates a dynamic HTML thanks to different components. So the parameters of the request, the nature of the request, so depending if it is a method, a get or a post method, depending on the result of the execution of some database, as I explained in this figure. So a servlet may send information, may send a request to the database, and data are sent back to the servlet that could be used to calculate some components, some result. And thanks also to the knowledge about the data from the client. So what are the data that are sent from the client, if you remember? So for example, the type of the browser, the operating system, so on and so forth. So all this could be combined to calculate the result of the servlet to be sent back to the client. We talked about also the concurrency of different threads. So the servlet could serve different clients at the same time. I said previously that we could have sessions and cookies in order to maintain the session opened between the client and the server. And of course, a servlet can access to a database and can use forms from the HTML of the client. So to show you this, we will start with a very simple example in which it's really a basic example in which, as it is shown in the execution here, we have a first HTML file, right? You can see this is the file is called welcome servlet HTML, containing a label and containing a button. Once I click on the button is linked to a servlet called welcome1 with no parameters, because we send no parameter from this HTML file. And then once it is executed, the result is simply a label. So how is this done? So as you can see, as you may guess, we need on one side HTML file, and we need a welcome, of course, a welcome servlet, which is a Java file. So here is the HTML file. We have the header of the file, which is handling HTTP GET request. This is what can be seen here. This is the name of the tab. Then we have a form, and you can see as the action we call a welcome1 servlet using the method get. How can we be sure that it is a get method? You can see here that we have a question mark. Of course, we have no parameter, but because of the get, you can see that we have a question mark. Okay, we have a label, and then we have the button. We know it's a button because we have the type submit and we have the value. So once we click on this one, we go to execute welcome1 servlet. So of course, when we talk about servlet, we talk about Java code. So how to know it is a servlet? Because the name of the class extends a already defined servlet of Java Enterprise Edition, which is called HTTP servlet. So once you extend this class, by default, your program is a servlet. Of course, it cannot be a servlet without the use of different imports. You can see that you import different packages and, of course, different methods within these packages to allow this servlet to be executed. Here, if you remember, because we used the get method, then it is important, it is necessary to implement the do-get. This do-get method works with two parameters, the request and the response. Remember, we have seen here that, so the request allows the servlet to access this object memory, and the response allows the servlet to access to this part of the memory. So, okay, since we have no parameter to be retrieved from the servlet, we start directly preparing the response. Here we specify that the response will be of type text and HTML. And we are going to write within this response using the getWriter method, and the object that we use is, in general, we name it out to say that it will be the response. And as you can see, our object is called with the method println, and you can see that the parameter of this println, we start writing a HTML code. So this is the beginning of an HTML file, and as you can see in the next slide, we have the HTML file, we have the header, and we have the body. So in the header, we have the title, simple servlet example. This is what we have in the execution. Simple servlet example. And then we have the body in which we simply display welcome to servlet. Simply. Once we're done, we close our object. So how this is done? Using, for example, the NetBeans IDE. So here is my example. As I said, I have one file, which is HTML file, and then I have a source package in which I have, sorry, I'm gonna quickly delete this one. We don't need it. And we have a welcome one, which is a HTTP servlet, which is a servlet, right? This is exactly what we have. So if I want to execute, I will simply click here and run my program. So as you can see, here is the HTML file. Once I click, I have the response. So how is this done? If I want to do it from the beginning, so I'm going to show you from the beginning how to do it. So you click on File, you call a new project, you go to the category Java Web, you click on Java Application, you click on Next, and then you provide the name of your project. So let's say, for example, it's Web Application 2, name it whatever you want to name it. You can change the location, the folder in which you are going to store your files, so on and so forth. Click on Next, and then here you provide the server. So if you have other servers, you have to choose it. Otherwise, by default, when you install NetBeans, it comes, Glassfish comes by default. Keep Java EE 7, okay? And then you can also specify the path in which you would find other components of your application. You click on Next. For the moment, or so far, we have no framework to use. So just simply click on Finish. So the whole project will be here generated, in which you have the web pages where you're going to store your web pages, and also inside source package, you are going to provide or store your Java programs. So in index.html, by default, you can see that nothing is already programmed. In our case here, I have added other components as it is explained in the slides. And then you go inside source packages and you click on new and you say, I'm gonna have servlet. You provide the name of your servlet. You click on Next. Generally, you have nothing to add. Okay, so your new servlet is here. By default, you have some components or some lines that you can, you are invited to change according to the program you have. So this is very simple. You need nothing to do except the different operations I have just shown. Okay, so if you go back, just change the name, change the content of your index.html, add a servlet, pay attention to have inside your index.html, the name you have here, welcome one, should be the same as the one you have here, okay, to allow everything to work carefully. So once you're done, what you do, first of all, you can, for example, clean and build. This is what we have. I'm gonna I no longer need these two other files, but if you go to output, okay, I'm gonna clear everything here. I'm gonna clear everything, clear, and clear everything to start from the beginning. Okay, so what you can do from the beginning, you can start simply clean and build to see if there is any error. So you can see here that the build is successful. Then if you want to execute, how to do it? Remember, you will need to have a server, web server. So at the beginning, this glassfish is not running on your server. So it will be something like, I'm gonna stop it. Okay, so now it is stopped. I'm gonna clear everything as if nothing has happened so far. Okay, and then as you can see, I will start executing. You can deploy, etc., but you can simply executing your program. You will see it's gonna take time. Why? Because for the moment, Glassfish is running, is loading on your server, on your machine. If you click on Glassfish, you can see that now Glassfish is loading. It takes time at the beginning. Okay, here it is. If I click, it is the answer. Now, the next time, because Glassfish has already been loaded, if I make any changes in my program, let's say I change simply, instead of call servlet, let's name it simply hi servlet. And then I execute again. It didn't change. So what I should do, okay, if this happens, if this happens on your machine, what you do, you go to services, you open this, you open application, and you simply undeploy all the programs that have been deployed so far, okay? And then you execute again. It didn't change, I don't know why. Okay. Now you see it will take time because Glassfish is loading. Okay, it didn't work. I don't know why. I'm gonna fix it and get back to you to finish the course. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.